Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. There's Buffy the Vampire Slayer news, and as a huge Buffy the Vampire fan, I just had to cover it. So let's get into the news and I'll give you my thoughts on it. A Buffy the Vampire Slayer revival is in the works at Hulu, with Sarah Michelle Gellar set to be reprising her iconic role as the title character. This is all according to Deadline. Nora and Liana Zuckerman of Poker Face and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. fame will be writing the pilot, and it will be directed by Chloe Zhao, most famous for her Oscar-winning film Nomadland. And of course, The Eternals, which, for what it's worth, I actually really enjoyed, but I know it's not one of the more popular Marvel films. Joss Whedon, the original creator and writer of the series, is not set to return. As I'm sure you recall, he was canceled for a history of creating toxic workplaces and bullying on his shows and films. While I do think that he's a genius as a writer, it's not surprising that he hasn't really worked in Hollywood since all of that came out. It was a good example of having to separate the art and the artist for me personally. This whole reboot is a bit of a surprise and something I never really considered or expected to happen. I'm a huge Buffy and Angel fan. I have a recap podcast covering the shows called the Sunnydale Review, but I'm not sure how that style fits into the streaming era of television. The 22 episode format really allowed the creatives behind the show to experiment with the format and style of the medium. I think if this is, say, a 10 episode season with one main storyline, it could definitely be good, but it would lose what made the shows what they were. We wouldn't have many of the most iconic episodes like Hush, Once More with Feeling, or The Zeppo in Buffy, and I doubt we'd have the Angel Pylea arc that was fairly separate from the main storyline of season 2, but brought in a more fun tone and the addition of Lauren and Fred as main members of Angel Investigations. Also, Geller has consistently shown that she wanted to leave the role behind. In an interview with Mario Lopez on his radio show back in 2021, she had this to say.
Speaking of reboots, by the way, I'm sure you've gotten approached a lot about Buffy type of reimagining or reboot. Is it something you would consider, or what are your thoughts?
Wee bit, how do they say, long in the tooth for that. I think what worked for Buffy was that, the monsters represented, they were the metaphors for the horrors of adolescence.
Mhm.
And I do think that story lends itself. It'd be interesting to see how a chosen one would deal with that. I don't think it's me. I don't think I should be the one doing it. And I'm also way too tired and cranky to put in that kind of work again. But I love that the story holds up and that people are calling for that.
Yeah, and had great spin-off too. So no, very cool.
So it seemed like the idea of a reboot was out of the question. That wasn't until December 2024 when she was promoting her role in the Dexter prequel series Original Sin, where she said this.
I mean, if Dexter is getting an origin story and a reboot, would you ever consider a Buffy? And I'm sure everybody's asking you that.
It's funny because
But I want to know for my own.
I would want to know. It's funny. I always used to say no, like because it's in its bubble and it's so perfect. And but watching Sex of the City and seeing Dexter and realizing that there are ways to do it definitely does get your mind thinking. Like,
And it
well,
doesn't have to be a
maybe,
prequel, right? It could be.
No, it could be anything. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a universe, and it makes you realize that in this world we need those heroes. I think more so than ever.
According to Deadline, that's when negotiations started in earnest. So I guess we'll see. I really love this world and universe. I've been inspired by it in my own works, but I feel like it ended so well that I'm nervous for a continuation. Also, not for nothing, the original series is so wonderfully weird that I don't think Hollywood would ever take a risk on it today. I think they should try to create new risky shows before going back to the well. In a previous video about The Acolyte, I lamented the fact that shows aren't really allowed to come into their own in the streaming world. They are far too expensive to not be a hit right away, and that stifles creativity, which can result in shows that are in theory trying to be for everyone, and in practice end up being for no one. I actually use Buffy as a good example of a show that struggled to find its footing during its first season, but had enough great elements that you were able to overlook some of the lesser elements, and eventually it became one of the most iconic and influential pieces of television in history. So I hope the reboot is given the same room to grow and become its own thing, but I also would love if they took some risks on original properties. Most importantly, though, this might not even happen. I remember a few years ago hearing about a reboot/sequel series that was in the works with Whedon attached, and that ended up going nowhere. There were also rumors in the past about a Faith series at one point, and even a Giles prequel movie. Until I'm actually watching the show on Hulu, I'm going to try not to think about it too much past this video. So, what are your thoughts about a potential Buffy reboot? Are you as nervous about it as I am? Or maybe you're just really excited? Let me know in the comments.